welcome back to Have Roots Will Travel. If this is your first time, welcome. My name is Lisa Elvin Stoltari, and I'm a genealogist and a passionate traveler. And the reason why I'm a passionate traveler is when you're doing genealogy, you are traveling. Just this way is usually through time and space. And you have to get to know the locations that you are, researching. You can't just, pick up dates and times and that sort of thing. You've really got to understand where they lived. And so that is traveling, isn't it? So when I started this channel back in 2021, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I have a lot of topics I can talk about. But this topic of Les Filles du Roi became sort of I went with it and ran. And so I started off just doing an homage to my mother and wanted to honor one of hers, or her main one, if you will, that started the branch. And it turned out that, well, I got to do another one, and then I got a response, and then I did another one, and it kind of I did not plan on doing all of the Filles du Roi. I'm now on episode 325. So I've been at this for a while. There's about 700 of them, and I'm not sure that there are 700 who have descendants. I haven't worked that out yet, but I am planning on doing all of them, and then at the very end, those who didn't leave descendants, I will do a special episode on them as well, just because it's important that their names are known, that they were part of that tapestry. So that is the story of Have Roots Will Travel and its exploration of Les Filles du Roi. Later in 2023, I started a parallel series, which is Les Filles Mariées, which are the women who came before. So in case you want to see the difference. And before we begin talking about the next Filles du Roi that we'll be exploring, let me show you ways that you can support the channel. The first three keep you in the know. Subscribe, like, and notify. And then the next three are ways that you can help the channel grow. We have our YouTube memberships that you can look at. You can click on the link. If you are a member, then you get free access to all of the videos as soon as they're posted. And membership starts at 99 cents. So and you can cancel at any time. And then we also have the super thanks, where if you like a particular video, you can leave a donation. And then, of course, there's the PayPal button on my website, Have Roots Will Travel. Also, I want to mention, as we get into 325 videos, you may go like, I wonder if she's done this one. You can go and look on my website. There's an index there as well that you can access and see. And I believe I put links to most of the episodes that I've done, if not all. And I have to update it, I have to be honest, now that I'm talking. So, but most of them are there. So have a look at that in case you're wondering, did I do one of yours? If not, make sure you write me and let me know that you need this one done. So I will put it on my list. So without further ado, let's get to know our Filles du Roi of this episode. Today we're going to be looking at episode 325. About that number, it just feels like we've done 325 videos. Amazing. Today we're going to be looking at Jeanne Amiot. She comes to us from a viewer request. I did not have her in my file, so let's get to know Jeanne a little bit better. Now, Jeanne was born in 1651 in Langres, France. Her parents were Noël Amiot and Anne Vivienne. Now, let's talk a little bit about this commune called Langres in northeastern France, and specifically about its former parish, Saint-Pierre. Langres is a beautiful fortified hilltop town in the region of Grand Est, and it's found in the Haute-Marne department, the county, and it's famous for its impressive medieval ramparts, the picturesque old town, and its rich history dating all the way back to Roman times. Over the centuries, Langres became a significant religious center, home to several important parishes. One of these was the parish of Saint-Pierre that Jeanne would have been baptized in. It was established in the 12th century and, of course, would serve all the way for the next 600 years and finally fell under favor after it was dissolved, actually, in the early 1800s after a little thing called the French Revolution. But you can kind of get a feeling for what the church may have looked like. This is a very impressive cathedral that you see right on the left of your screen, and that is the Grand Saint Meme Cathedral, and it's just a really, really classic church, and it'll give you a feel for what Jeanne's church might have looked like. And so let's have a look at what brought Jeanne, like so many others, to New France. So in the information that I have been able to find, it appears that Jeanne came to New France in 1673 after her mother passed away, and she brought a dowry with her worth about 200 pounds. Now let's have a look at when she arrived. September 3rd, 1673. You know what? That's the last ship. She climbed aboard the last ship going to New France as a Fille du Roi. There were no others. The program was ending at that point. There had been enough growth and continued to have growth. But the program basically had started 10 years prior in 1663. So this was the ending of it, and thank goodness for her descendants that Jeanne caught that ship. Now the groom that she would select, his name was Nicolas Pion de la Fontaine. He was born in 1639 in a city called Tours, and some of you may have heard of this town. It's very, very famous. His parents were Nicolas Pion and Catherine Bredon. Tours is situated in the Indre et Loire department that you can see in the middle of your screen, and it is part of the Centre Val de Loire region of France. And it's really a gateway to the Loire Valley and all the chateaus, the castles that are there. And the city of Tours has several notable parishes and churches, and each contributed to the extraordinary cultural and historical tapestry of Tours. Founded in the region of Centre Val de Loire, in this particular commune has 136,000 inhabitants as of 2018, while the entire metropolitan area has 500,000. Now, Tours became a part of the Roman Empire during the 1st century, and by the 4th century it was renamed Tours, and its famous amphitheater was built. Once one of the most active parishes inside the city walls of Tours, Église Saint-Pierre du Voile, stood proudly from the 11th century onward. Originally, it was a Romanesque structure. The church and its presbytery were rebuilt around 1460, likely due to fire or war, common for that period in France. It was located near the northwest corner of Old Tours, and it sat close to the bustling Grand Rue and the Loire River, right where the commerce, religion, and daily life collided. But the French Revolution arrived in 1792 like a wrecking ball, and the church was seized, secularized, and then destroyed as part of the widespread purge. Fortunately, the parish registers, if you're looking for genealogical research, survive, and they date back to 1597 and recorded baptisms, marriages, deaths until just before the church's downfall. And the name of the church, du Voile, B-O-I-L-E, may refer to a field, a grove, or an ancient villa. Saint-Pierre du Voile wasn't a countryside chapel. It was part of the urban religious grid of medieval Tours. So if this is your ancestry, absolutely this is where you're going to focus your attention in terms of trying to find those records. Now, Nicolas was one of those engagés, as we call them. He signed up at La Rochelle in 1665, and he would have signed either a 3-year or a 5-year contract. And at the end of that contract, he would have had the opportunity to purchase land or settle there or be granted land, depending on the kind of contract he had. And these were not indentured servants. Early on in my career, not my career, but my YouTube, I used to call them indentured servants until I was extremely corrected by a very wise genealogist who said, no, they're not indentured. They are literally engagés, contracted workers who would come over and do the job and then In much the same way we would, you could get a contract to go and work in Saudi Arabia. It was kind of like that. And so then they would receive their contract. Usually they get money up front and then at the end. And so Nicolas would have come and would have seen what he had to see, and probably would have said, you know what, I want to stay. And that's where we find him in 1673. So he was in New France for about 8 years before he and Jeanne would have, done the dance. So they were married September 19th, 1673. There is no mention of the um, king's dowry of the £50, so we don't know if she got it or not. But think about that date, September 19th. Remember, I told you she arrived September 3rd. And so that would have meant that 16 days later, she's getting married. Now that is fast, much faster. This is one of the fastest I've ever seen. And just an amazing testament to the fact he was ready and she was there. So that was kind of an exciting, when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's amazing. So definitely she came and she was ready for marriage and she knew what she wanted, and she wanted Nicolas. Now the family would settle at Sorel. And Sorel began as a military outpost. In 1642, the French colonial government constructed Fort Richelieu at the mouth of the Richelieu River to protect the waterway from the Iroquois raids. The original fort was destroyed just a few years later, but in 1665, the Carignan-Salieres regiment arrived from France, and Captain Pierre de Sorel, one of the regiment's officers, led the rebuilding of Fort Richelieu. The surrounding area gradually developed into a permanent settlement named Sorel in his honor. The early builders were soldiers and settlers and fur traders with strong ties to the military and seigneurial systems of New France. After the British conquest in 1760, Sorel remained strategically important. Following the American Revolution, it became a loyalist refuge, welcoming English-speaking settlers fleeing the newly formed United States. And for a time, it was actually renamed William Henry and even served briefly as the capital of Lower Canada. I bet you didn't know that. Over the next century, French Canadians reasserted their presence in the region. The town evolved from a fort to a port and eventually into an industrial center, especially known for shipbuilding and steel. The foundation laid by those military engineers, the loyalist settlers, and French Canadian laborers is still visible in the town's layout and historic buildings today. And I also want to point out, if you have, as many of us do, we have French and English, so you may actually have English ancestors from Sorel, and I've known many English people whose roots are in Sorel, and so it's always interesting to see that kind of juxtaposition between the French and the English, particularly in Sorel. So let's have a look at the next town. They didn't stay in Sorel all that long, but let's have a look. Now they would eventually settle at a place called Verchères. Now Verchères is a municipality on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River. I'm showing you the map there. And it is between Longueuil and Sorel. So they kind of, went up and down the river banks, if you will. In 1665, François Jaret, Sœur de Verchères, obtained a commission with the Carignan-Salieres regiment and was sent to New France. In 1672, he was granted the seigneurie of Verchères for his military service. During wartime, the seigneurie was subjected to frequent Iroquois attacks. And to combat this problem, de Verchères erected a palisade around the manor house. It was from the defense of this palisade that the legend of his daughter, 14-year-old Marie-Madeleine Jaret de Verchères, originates. And so that particular statue that you see there, that's her. And what happened was they were coming, the natives were coming at them, and with just a handful of elderly men and children, and they're very quick thinking, she held off the attackers for several days. And her bravery made her a folk hero in Quebec history. And early settlers in Verchères were mostly French Canadians, many of them farmers and fur traders. And then the population remained largely rural throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. And we have strong Catholic roots and ties to traditional Quebec culture. Family names like Gagne and Prou and Lemoine appear frequently in the area's parish records. Verchères was also a stop along the river trade routes, and its residents were known for their boat building skills. In fact, the distinctive flat-bottomed boats called chaloupe Verchères were used up and down the St. Lawrence in the 1800s. Today, Verchères is a quiet town that still celebrates its past, with historic buildings, a small museum, and that ever-watchful statue. And I also want to mention that those of you who are touring Quebec may want to know that she actually would marry and settle in a place called Sainte-Anne-de-la-Parade, and I had the pleasure of visiting her manor house a couple of years ago. Absolutely amazing. So she would go on to get married and move and establish another seigneur with another gentleman. So, but she carried with her the legend of what she had done in her youth. So that is the story of Verchères. Go on to have 8 children. Jeanne would pass away at 14 years of age. Jeanne would marry Jean Serre and would have 1 child, who did survive. Pierre would pass away at 8 years of age. Angélique would pass away at 5. Nicolas would pass away at 2. Maurice would marry Thérèse Chicoine, and they would have 9 children, 7 of whom would leave descendants. Thérèse's mother was Madeleine Chrétier, a Fille du Roi, who we profiled in episode 172, and I put the links for you there. And then we have Anne with no other information, and Louise, who passed away at 1 year of age. So it was very, very challenging to have, she had 1 or 2 children that lived a little longer, but still, she only had 2 children who produced any descendants. And can you imagine just bearing the loss of all these children? Just incredible what she would have had to go through. Now you'll notice there is no 1681 census. It's a very rare thing. The couple or the family was not found in the 1681 census. That is the consensus. If someone can find them, please let me know, okay? Because I looked at my references, and I was unable to find them in the 1681 census. Unfortunately, after all the pain of losing her children, she would also lose her husband in 1703 at the age of 64. And he and she would have been married 29 years. Jeanne never stopped believing, obviously, in love and life and all of the above, because she did find a new love about a year later. So she would choose as her second groom a man named François Chicoine de la Fresnière. He was born in 1678. If you recall, Jeanne was born in 1651, giving us a 27-year age gap, if my numbers are correct. Now, François was born in Montreal, and his parents were Pierre Chicoine and Madeleine Chrétier. Yes, that is the same pair that also were the parents of the spouse that Jeanne's son, Maurice, would marry, making the fact, in other words, François was the brother of the woman who married her son. So it was really kind of, now when she married François, Maurice was about 18 years of age, and he would marry his the sister about 10 years later. So, but obviously this is very unusual. So this is kind of very interesting how people met during those times, and kind of, so your connection, if your line descends through Maurice, it will be interesting for you to look at that double connection. One of the things I haven't covered yet is the fact that Jeanne was also a midwife, also known as a sage-femme. That is the term for midwife. I love it better in French. Sage-femme means wise woman. Don't you just love that? And I think that ultimately when she married her spouse, her second spouse, in November of 1704. He and she did not have any children, obviously, but they did remain at Verchères. Now, Jeanne would pass away, if you can believe this, 1745, and she was buried 2 days later. She was the oldest fille du roi, having reached about the age of 94. Now, that being said, her burial claims, okay, 107. Now, you can imagine back in the day when women, normally people would be, passing away in the 60s if they were lucky. So somebody who's 94 at that point is inconceivable. So she was clearly very old, but she wasn't 107. So that is an extraordinary life. And she would go on to leave us with a descendancy that was very small, 16 descendants. For all of that, remember, she only had 2 children. So she had a daughter and a son that left descendants. So I'm very fascinated to find out the descendants that are there, because there's not a lot to start with. So I want to see if there's a lot of this fabulous woman who was obviously very strong and never gave up, either on herself or on love. So that's kind of a really neat story. Now, that would have meant that she was married to her second husband, so young. They would have been married approximately 40 years. So that's an astonishing thing, to have had 2 extremely successful marriages. So again, she is just a remarkable woman. I recommend a couple of books. The first is in French. It's The Pioneers of Varennes and Verchères, and she is listed on them. So you might want to get that and then possibly run it through some sort of translating module. The Women of Ville Marie is in English, and I always recommend it whenever I'm dealing with the Montreal area, certainly Pioneers of 17th Century Montreal. Susan McNally, who is a esteemed colleague of mine, she is just phenomenal, and this book really is inspirational in terms of understanding what the ladies went through, and how they survived. And so I couldn't recommend it more highly. It is available on Amazon, and I put the link, and then the book for the Varennes and Verchères is part of the La Société d'Histoire des Filles du Roi, so you might want to check that out as well. If I tell you I love this episode, I truly did, because when I saw that she carried on even after her first husband passed away and was a midwife, and then had the courage to marry, I would think for love, a man much younger than her, and I thought that was really inspiring, that she defied, not getting married to a man younger, but defying the kind of the parameters of the time. I always like stories like that. And then to live such an extraordinary life, and a long life, and be such a contribution to the areas that she lived in. So we are very impressed by her, and we are grateful that she came to our shores. We are so blessed, and we honor her memory, and we are thankful that she gave what she could and more. So thank you so much, my dear Jeanne. And I want to say thank you to our patrons, supporters, and subscribers. You are amazing. Thank you for all your well wishes and your constructive criticisms and your positive feedback. I love it all. And I really take it all in if I can. And please feel free to write me at lisa@haverootswilltravel.com and express any questions or concerns, or whatever. I love hearing from you all. So with that being said, I will see you on the next episode of Les Filles du Roi. Until then, au revoir.